This Pechakucha is made by Jacob Seipel, Jacob Creamer, Kevin Thomas, and Amir Abdullah. It will be explaining the comparison between Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and Winston Churchill's Never Give In speech. Even though only separated by 7 decades, these two works are drastically different in context, but have some key features that make them more similar than the eye can see. Both Edgar Allan Poe and Winston Churchill were raised in poor families. When they went to the military, they were transformed into different people, which influenced their works greatly. Poe pursued a career in writing, including poems, while Churchill went into government. They both became prominent figures as they moved up their respective ladders, and these have become their most famous works. There are 3 prominent elements of literature in these works, such as the tone of hope, the imagery of demons, despair, and destruction, and symbols of wishful thinking. Each of these elements are favored by both writers, Poe and Churchill, not only in these 2 pieces, but also in the rest of their work. They have both gained massive credit for their works, although not compared often, these similarities are striking. There is a looming feeling in both pieces of literature. In Churchill's piece, the British had just been bombed, leaving dark imagery throughout the speech. Just like Poe's narrative, his explanation of Lenore to be at the door when he hears knocking in The Raven. The dark imagery surrounds the Raven at the door parallels to the despair of the British bombing and the same as the despair is set in with both. As present in both, anguish brings the works of Poe and Churchill together to convince the audiences that they need to change their hatred of death and turn it into something useful. In The Raven, Poe describes how much he misses Lenore, hating himself for letting it happen, putting him in deeper depression. In Churchill's piece, he wants the audience to turn their hate into revenge. War has ravished both authors, which has influenced how they wrote each of their pieces. This is a big contribution for the dark tone described in both Poe and Churchill's writings. The search for answers during dark times of their own lives reflects through their works. The dark tone described puts a murky haze throughout their teachings. Just as Munch painted the screen, these authors' reasoning for what they are doing is to motivate the people by instilling a sense of uncomfortableness. They are able to promote change, but in order to do this, there needs to be an instigator. In Churchill's case, it was the bombing, and in Poe's, he used Lenore and knocking. These instigators need to topple over them in the struggles to get their point across. As Churchill himself explains, words have no power on paper. We need the reality of London bombings to inspire us to never give in. Similarly, in The Raven, the narrator describes as Lenore is not at the door, just this nevermore Raven. He is devastated by the reality that Lenore will never be at his door anymore. For nevermore, as he repeats in his work. Although dark objects such as ravens and bombings appear throughout the tone of their works, they give the audience hope as if something good can happen from the darkness they are experiencing. Both of these works remain positive at a time when there is little positivity or attitude to go around. In both, they set an example to not give in when the going gets tough. In Never Give In, Churchill rallies his troops as they prepare to accomplish the largest amphibious strike in history, while the narrator in The Raven remains hopeful that the knocking at his door is Lenore, and they can finally be reunited. They both show qualities of hope, a time when hope is not readily present. Just like Churchill gives hope to himself, Poe gives the hope to the reader for Lenore to come to his door. The speaker in The Raven and the audience in Never Give In both feel a variety of negative emotions. The speaker starts to calm and collected, but soon becomes bewildered, insane, and confused due to the Raven at his door. Whereas in Never Give In, the audience starts off as distraught and confounded about the bombing, but finds inspiration in Churchill's speech to move on to the bigger matter at hand. In both pieces could be described as hopeful. The narrator is at first hopeful that Lenore is knocking at his door, or she will come to him sometime throughout the night. Winston Churchill installs hope in the citizens of England by telling them not to let the bombings get to them. As long as they have just a glimmer of hope, we can come out of this like champions and serve justice to the ones that have wronged. The narrator hopes more than anything that his loved ones in some way will come back to him from the grave. He hopes it so much to the fact that the only question he can ask himself. It's the only thing he can think about. His hope is killing him from the inside out. The Never Give In speech shows how one bad incident can eat the hope of a country. Hope, however, is not always a positive thing. The Raven is a perfect example of how you can have hope in an impossible situation can put one into a hole. The narrator refuses to give up hope, thus leading to his demise. Just like the bombing in England, it puts the whole country into a hole of no hope. Both pieces of literature have symbols hidden throughout them. Poe weaves symbols of both lightness and darkness, in such as demons and angels. but Churchill has mostly positive symbols that convey a strong, positive message to pick up and rally his listeners from the British bombings. In the poem The Raven, Nevermore is an allusion to how the narrator will never find his Lenore or others that he has lost in his life, and he will be completely alone, but the narrator refuses to lose hope, thus driving him insane. Winston Churchill, however, utilizes the word as a sign saying the citizens of Britain shall never be afraid of the bombings and they will prevail even in the darkest hour. After the bombing of Britain, victims were disoriented and lost. Winston Churchill's speech was to rally the people of Britain to get them back on their feet. We don't necessarily know what the raven symbolizes, but it shows the speaker's insanity and how the raven drives the narrator off the edge into deeper insanity. These both symbolize how society can lose their mind at a slightest jolt. The people of Britain were unaware of how close they can come to complete destruction before the bombings happened. Now they are aware and can learn from that event. In The Raven, the narrator is unaware of the unbalanced nature of his mind and learns that when the raven arrives, both of these pieces show the inner and outer destruction of human nature. After both of these pieces, a similar goal is made clear. From the darkest and saddest state of mind, both the people of Britain and the narrator need to pick themselves up and move on. In order to reach a happy state of mind, all of the demons must be extinguished from their lives, thus creating a greater purpose for both of these works. In conclusion, we can see that the similarities between The Raven and Never Give In speech are immense. Both stories have their own way of showing the light and darkness, unaware of the presence of both angels and demons, while showing the struggle of never giving up during hardships.